There are decisions that leaders make in the middle of a war that tell you more clearly than any map update or diplomatic exactly how confident they are and exactly what they believe is possible, not the defensive decisions, the ones made under pressure in response to an adversary's move, scrambling to plug a gap or stop a bleeding front. The other kind, the decisions made from a position of demonstrated capability, of momentum, of a strategic calculation, that the moment has arrived to push harder than you have ever pushed before and see what breaks. On the evening of June 25, 2026, Volodymyr Zelensky made exactly that kind of decision, and the name he gave it tells you everything about the ambition behind it. A 40-day influence operation against the aggressor state, aimed at compelling it to end the war. Stay with me, because by the time we are done here, you are going to understand not just what Zelensky approved and what the SBU is about to do for the next 40 days, but the entire strategic logic that made this moment possible, the months of preparation, the intelligence gathered, the targets hit, the air defenses degraded, the oil refineries shut down, the Crimean logistics strangled, the Belarus ultimatum enforced, that built the platform from which Ukraine's president could look at his security service chief on June 25th, listen to the briefing on long-range sanctions and medium-range sanctions and the battlefield results of the Alpha Special Operations Center and say, I approve, 40 days, end this war. And what happened less than 12 hours later, when Ukraine launched one of the largest drone attacks in the entire history of this conflict, tells you that this operation is not a declaration. It has already begun. Let us start with exactly what Zelensky said and what he did not say, because both matter in equal measure. On the evening of Thursday, June 25, 2026, following a meeting at the office of the President with Major General Yevhen Kamara, the acting head of Ukraine's Security Service of Ukraine, Zelensky published a statement simultaneously on Facebook and X. The core of that statement was two sentences that contain more operational weight than their brevity suggests. He said he had received a briefing on our plan for long-range sanctions, medium-range sanctions, and the results achieved by the SBU, particularly by its Center of Special Operations Alpha at the front, and then I approved a 40-day influence operation for the service against the aggressor state, aimed at compelling it to end the war. What Zelensky did not say is as significant as what he did. He provided no specific tactical details, no list of target categories, no geographic scope beyond what could be inferred from the reference to long-range and medium-range sanctions, no benchmarks for what success would look like at the end of 40 days. The operation is classified. What is public is the intent compelling Russia to end the war, and the agency leading it, the SBU, Ukraine's domestic and foreign intelligence organization, whose involvement in long-range drone strikes against Russian territory has been one of the most significant and least reported dimensions of the entire conflict. That combination of maximum public ambition and minimum operational disclosure is deliberate. It is designed to tell Russia what is coming in general terms while giving Ukraine's operators maximum flexibility in the specific execution, what the SBU actually does in this war and why it is leading the 40-day operation. Most people who follow this conflict understand the SBU as Ukraine's primary domestic and counterintelligence agency, the organization responsible for catching Russian spies, investigating sabotage networks, and protecting Ukraine's internal security, and it is those things. But since the full-scale invasion, the SBU has developed into something considerably more operationally significant than any peacetime intelligence agency, and understanding that transformation is essential to understanding why Zelensky gave the 40-day mandate specifically to the SBU rather than to the armed forces of Ukraine or the Defense Ministry. The SBU's Center of Special Operations Alpha, the unit that Kamara specifically briefed Zelensky on at the June 25th meeting, has become one of Ukraine's most effective drone warfare units. According to Zelensky's own statement, for several months in a row, the SBU has demonstrated the highest performance in defending Ukraine's positions on the front lines through the use of various types of drones, and the Alpha Center specifically leads in terms of Russian personnel and equipment neutralized. This is not the description of an intelligence agency doing traditional intelligence work. This is the description of an organization that has built drone warfare capability comparable to or exceeding that of conventional military units, deployed it at the front, and produced measurable, documented results that outperform what other Ukrainian military organizations have achieved in the same period. The SBU has also been central to Ukraine's deep strike campaign inside Russia. The Ukraine-based operational security around deep strike is necessarily tight, but investigative reporting and official statements have confirmed that SBU units have been directly involved in the planning, intelligence preparation, and execution of drone strikes on Russian targets including oil refineries, fuel depots, ammunition arsenals, and air defense systems deep inside Russian territory. The SBU maintains intelligence networks that operate inside Russian-occupied territories and inside Russia itself, networks that provide real-time targeting intelligence for exactly the kind of precision deep strike operations that the 40-day campaign will rely on. When Zelensky says the SBU is leading a 40-day influence operation, he is not assigning a bureaucratic coordination role to an agency with a government seal. He is activating an organization that has already demonstrated it can find, track, and destroy Russian military assets at ranges and with precision that Russia's defensive architecture cannot reliably prevent. The platform that made the 40 days possible, what Ukraine built before June 25, the 40-day operation, did not materialize from nowhere. It is the culmination of a strategic preparation campaign that has been building across the entire first half of 2026, and understanding what was built before June 25 is essential to understanding what the next 40 days can realistically achieve. Russia began 2026 with what its own military leadership and its Western analysts considered a significant air defense advantage over Ukraine's long-range strike capacity. Russia's layered air defense network S-400 long-range systems, Pantsir S-1 and S-2 short-range interceptors, Tor medium-range systems, electronic warfare platforms, interceptor aircraft had been designed and positioned specifically to detect, track, and destroy incoming Ukrainian drones before they could reach their targets. That network represented Russia's most important defensive investment, and it was supposed to make Ukraine's deep strike campaign unsustainable by imposing prohibitive attrition on every drone Ukraine sent. Ukraine spent the first half of 2026 systematically dismantling that network. The SBU Alpha unit alone neutralized approximately half of Russia's Pantsir stockpile through a dedicated campaign of targeted strikes that hunted the air defense systems specifically and methodically. The loss of half the Pantsir fleet created coverage gaps over Russian military infrastructure that did not exist in 2025. Those gaps allowed longer-range Ukrainian drones to penetrate deeper and survive longer against a degraded defensive network. The Moscow oil refinery, struck twice in a single week in mid-June, is the most visible product of that coverage gap. The fact that it will be offline until at least early 2027 is the most concrete measure of what that gap produced. Simultaneously, Ukraine was expanding its drone production to levels that made sustained high-volume deep strike operations economically and logistically viable. By early 2026, Ukraine was producing more than 8 million FPV drones annually, long-range attack drones capable of reaching targets 2,000 kilometers inside. Russia were being produced in sufficient numbers to launch mass attacks repeatedly within a single week. The 800,000 verified target strikes since January 1st, the 181,000 targets struck in May alone, the 660 drones launched in a single night on June 26. These numbers are possible because Ukraine has built an industrial-scale drone production ecosystem that did not exist 4 years ago. That ecosystem is the supply chain for the 40-day operation. It is running and it has never produced at higher volume. And then, in the 10 days immediately before June 25th, Ukraine executed a series of operations that served both as direct military achievements and as final demonstrations of capability before the formal 40-day operation began. Ukraine struck the Moscow oil refinery twice and put it offline for months. Ukraine destroyed the North Crimean Canal railway bridge in a two-phase operation that then hunted and destroyed the repair equipment. Ukraine issued a 7-day ultimatum to Belarus over drone relay infrastructure and watched the stations go dark before the deadline expired. Ukraine obtained Russian internal documents showing Moscow was stripping air defense coverage from across its territory to protect only 2 locations, and Ukraine launched one of the largest drone attacks in the history of this conflict towers after Zelensky announced the 40-day operation. These were not random events. They were the operational foundation on which the 40-day campaign launches. Russia's response, the panic that Zelensky's announcement immediately said the speed and scale of Russia's reaction to Zelensky's June 25th announcement is itself a measure of how seriously Moscow took it. Within hours of the 40-day operation going public, the Russian-installed occupation authorities in occupied Crimea declared a regional state of emergency. Not a heightened alert, not an advisory. A formal state of emergency. the kind of administrative declaration that carries legal and logistical implications for how the territory is governed and how its population is managed. The Crimean state of emergency was the direct, immediate administrative response to a Ukrainian president saying publicly that the next 40 days would bring increased pressure on Russian assets and military infrastructure. That Crimea specifically declared a state of emergency rather than any other Russian-occupied or Russian territory tells you exactly where Moscow and its occupation authorities assess the most acute vulnerability to be. Crimea has spent the month of June 2026 having its railway bridges systematically destroyed, its oil terminals struck on both sides of the Kerch Bridge, its power grid hit, its air defense systems hunted and eliminated one by one, and its fuel supplies rationed to the point where civilian gasoline sales were suspended. The peninsula's SBU chief stated publicly that Crimea has become a zone of constant losses for Russian forces. When the 40-day operation was announced, the people running occupied Crimea looked at everything that had happened in June and made a rational calculation that the next 40 days would be more of the same, faster and harder. The state of emergency was their response to that calculation. And then, less than 12 hours after Zelensky's announcement, Ukraine launched 660 drones at Russian territory in a single night. Russia's defense ministry confirmed 660 drone intercepts across 12 Russian regions plus Crimea, the Black Sea, and the Sea of Azov. Moscow Mayor Sobyanin reported 47 drones intercepted. Heading toward the capital alone, 3 major Moscow airports Domodedovo, Vnukovo, and Sheremetyevo imposed flight restrictions, allowing arrivals and departures only under special authorization. Russia's defense ministry noted strikes on Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk, Kaluga, Rostov, Voronezh, Tula, and Ryazan regions simultaneously. Ukraine's security service confirmed striking 2 Russian naval ships and a cargo passenger ferry in Kerch, starting a large fire. An oil depot in Krasnodar Krai was hit. A chemical plant in Tula was struck. A radar system in occupied Kerch was destroyed. 660 drones in one night. 12 Russian regions. Naval ships in port, a chemical plant, an oil depot, Moscow's airports locked down. 3 weeks earlier, the largest single-night attack Ukraine had executed involved 556 drones. Ukraine broke its own record by more than 100 drones on the first night of the 40-day operation. If that is what the first night looks like, the mathematics of 40 consecutive nights becomes a genuinely alarming calculation for every military planner in Moscow. What 40 days actually means, the strategic logic of the timeline number 40 is not random. It is not chosen because it sounds dramatic or because it matches some precedent in military history. It is a specific operational timeline chosen because it aligns with a set of strategic realities that Ukraine's planners have mapped, and that Zelensky's June 25th briefing apparently confirmed. 40 days from June 25th is August 4, 2026. That window covers the peak of the summer fighting season in eastern and southern Ukraine, the period when Russian offensive operations traditionally intensify as weather and ground conditions favor mechanized movement. It covers the NATO summit scheduled for July 2026, where Ukraine's demonstrated performance will be directly relevant to alliance decisions about continued military support. It covers the period during which Russia's degraded fuel supply situation with the Moscow refinery offline, with fuel rationing in more than 60 Russian regions, with oil depot strikes continuing to reduce available reserves, will compound most acutely in its operational impact on Russian military logistics, and it covers the period during which Ukraine's sustained air defense suppression campaign will have left Russia's protective coverage at its thinnest, because the air defenses that have been stripped from the Russian interior to protect Moscow, and the Kerch Bridge cannot be replenished at a rate that closes the gaps before 40 days have elapsed. The 40-day operation is designed to hit Russia hardest at the moment when Russia is most vulnerable, when its air defense network has been most degraded, when its fuel supplies are most strained, when its military budget is most stretched, when its frontline units are absorbing the highest drone attrition rates in the history of this conflict, and when the domestic political pressure on Putin from Russian nationalist hardliners asking why the war is coming home to Moscow is at its most acute. Ukraine is not improvising. It is executing a plan built on 4 years of learning exactly where Russia's military system breaks and what it looks like when it begins to break, what Trump said, and what it means for the next 40 days. There is a dimension of the 40-day operation that has been reported quietly in the Western press, but that deserves more analysis than it has received. A senior Ukrainian official told the Kyiv Independent that U.S. President Donald Trump privately urged Zelensky to act more boldly against Russia in conversations surrounding the G7 summit earlier in June. The Kremlin dismissed the report as fabricated. Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov and Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov jointly denied that any such encouragement was given, but the Ukrainian official's account has not been retracted, and the timing of private Trump conversation followed within days by. Zelensky's approval of the most ambitious offensive operation Ukraine has announced publicly since the full-scale invasion began is at least suggestive. Whether or not Trump's private words were exactly what the Ukrainian official described, the operational reality is that Ukraine's 40-day campaign is proceeding in a context where the United States has not moved to restrain it. The EU has just disbursed the first tranche of a €90 billion loan to Ukraine. Finland has allocated additional funds for Ukrainian air defenses. The G7 summit produced commitments of continued support that Zelensky described as significant. The international architecture supporting Ukraine's ability to sustain and escalate its campaign has not weakened in June 2026. If anything, the demonstrated success of Ukraine's strikes in producing measurable disruption to Russian fuel supplies, air defense coverage, and industrial capacity has strengthened the case for continued support among allies who were previously uncertain about the trajectory of the conflict. And Trump's reported encouragement to act more boldly, if accurate, is a signal that matters beyond its literal content. It means the country that provides the most strategically significant intelligence sharing, satellite surveillance, and weapons systems to Ukraine has privately signaled that the current level of Ukrainian aggression toward Russian targets is within bounds that Washington can accommodate. That signal, publicly denied by Moscow and privately denied by no one in Washington, gives Ukraine operational latitude for the next 40 days that it may not have had 12 months ago. The intelligence officer in Kyiv and what the next 40 days will feel like from inside Russia. There is an SBU analyst sitting in Kyiv right now who has spent the last 6 months building the target list for the operation that Zelensky approved on June 25th. She has been tracking the supply chains, the rail schedules, the fuel depot inventory levels, the air defense system movements, the ammunition transfer routes, the electronics manufacturing facilities, the oil refinery maintenance schedules. She has maps that show where Russia's protective coverage is thinnest. She has databases that show which targets, if struck, produce the greatest degradation to Russia's ability to sustain its frontline forces. She has watched the Moscow oil refinery go offline and calculated what 40 days of similar operations across similar target sets would produce in terms of cumulative fuel supply disruption. She approved her part of the plan before Zelensky approved the whole, and she has 40 days to show what 4 years of intelligence collection and operational preparation can produce when everything is authorized and the platform is ready. From inside Russia, the next 40 days are going to feel like this. Every morning, Moscow residents will wake up to reports of overnight drone attacks on regions they never expected to hear about. Fuel shortages that were already stretching across more than 60 regions will deepen as the refinery and depot campaign continues. The airports will continue to impose temporary restrictions on nights when drones are approaching the capital. Russians who have spent 4 years of war living in what the Kremlin has been calling the safe deep rear will find that the safe deep rear is considerably less safe than they were told. Pro-Kremlin nationalist voices who have been asking loudly why the war keeps coming home will ask louder, and Putin will have to manage that domestic pressure while simultaneously refusing to engage in the genuine peace negotiations that Zelensky offered alongside the 40-day announcement. Because alongside the 40-day operation, Zelensky also made something rare. A direct personal appeal to Vladimir Putin to meet face-to-face in a neutral country for negotiations. Putin rejected it. The Kremlin refused to engage, and that refusal is the answer to anyone who asks whether Ukraine's 40-day campaign is an obstacle to peace or a means of pursuing it. Zelensky offered the table. Putin refused the chair. Ukraine will draw the necessary conclusions for the next 40 days. 40 days, one purpose, compelling Russia to end a war that Russia started. And on the first night, Ukraine launched 660 drones. If that is what day one looks like, count the days carefully. August 4th is coming.